Now, he also has a crucifixion scene. And one of the things that these images have is just tremendous numbers of inscriptions all over. I probably can't give you all of them. But here are some of the inscriptions. This is next to Christ on the cross. What you have is an image. It's in two parts. At the top, you have Christ standing beside the cross with the people who are trying to kill him, mock him, crucify him on the other side. So the preparations are right before the crucifixion. And Christ looks very meek and humble. Down below, you have a very elaborate crucifixion scene. You've got John, Mary, the two thieves, symbolic images of church and synagogue, I think Longinus and Stephaton, just many, many figures. So we're going to take a look at that. But let's read the inscription first. The inscription for Christ as he's standing beside the cross in the top part, the preparations for the crucifixion. When the first man, lost by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then of course there's more, I really can't put everything in, and when all mankind was given over to cruel death and became the prey of Leviathan, see that many pages later, the symbolic, the symbolism of Leviathan as evil, the devil, continues. First man, lost by the tree of knowledge of good and evil, mankind is given over to cruel death and became the prey of Leviathan. It pleased our Redeemer to raise the banner of the Holy Cross and to pierce it with the hook of his flesh and the throat of the dragon, so that, cut by the point of the tree of life, the monster was forced to return those he had devoured. This Holy Cross is for us the beacon of eternal light, designed to guide us through the darkness of this life. So she's using the symbolism that we just saw. Here we don't actually see the hook on the cross, but it's all there in that long inscription that you can see beside Christ. Below we see the crucifixion, the sacrifice of the cross. And the texts that are all through it, some are from the Bible, some are from commentaries, and you have your biblical narrative, but you also have it mixed with symbolic images. And so here we're looking a little closer. So we have Christ on the cross. You can see Mary on his right. This is the suffering Christ. His head dips down, his body sways to one side, his arms sink down, his eyes are closed. Mary on one side, John on another. You can see the good thief who believes in Christ, and the bad thief who rejects him. So many of the narratives that we associate with the crucifixion. Also you can see the personifications of the sun and the moon, the little heads above the cross arms. But then you also see two personifications below that you don't always see in crucifixions. But remember, we did have a contrast between life and death, grace and the law in the Uta Gospels. So here there's definitely church and synagogue. The church is riding a strange beast that has the heads of four animals. These are the four living creatures from the vision of Ezekiel, the vision of Daniel, and the vision of St. John in the Apocalypse. And they are the four living creatures that surround the throne of God and sing Sanctus, 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 holy, holy, holy. In the Middle Ages, they became interpreted as symbols of the four Gospels. And so all of the writers of the four first books of the Christian New Testament are given one of these animals as their symbols. The winged man or angel is the symbol of St. Matthew. The lion of St. Mark. The ox of St. Luke, and the eel of St. John. So these four heads then are representing the four Gospels. So the church essentially is mounted on the Gospels. She's holding up her chalice, which we've seen before, collecting the blood of Christ. And she's crowned. Below her, we see people coming out of the graves. And remember, we saw some of that at the Uta Gospels. And so the question is this just supposed to be, there's the earthquake and people's graves are uprooted, or it seems much more likely in this context, because you see the man who's rising out of his sarcophagus looks like he's invoking Christ, and his gesture parallels that uplifted gesture that we see with the church and Mary and Longinus saying that this is the Son of God. So it seems to me that that's probably a reference to the saving power of Christ that will restore mankind to life. On the other side, we see this donkey who seems to be falling over, tumbling down. There's a banner that's fallen, it's upside down, and the figure that's riding the donkey is the synagogue. She's blindfolded. There's a veil, really, that comes over her eyes, and the text says, "I am blind." To further identify the figure, she's given a little animal, which I think is a little goat, and a knife, referring to the old law which called for animal sacrifice. And, of course, under Christ has become the ultimate sacrifice. There's no more need to sacrifice animals. The ass is sort of tumbling toward or riding toward this sarcophagus, this coffin, that has a skeleton in it, and he hasn't come back to life. So there is this idea that the law only leads to death, but the sacrifice of Christ, according to Christian theology, will lead to eternal life. Of course, we're talking about Christian theology here because this is his. Another familiar image from medieval and Renaissance Christian art is the mystic wine press. The symbolism comes from commentaries both of St. Augustine and more closer to Herrad's time, Rupert of Dutz, who was 12th century theologian. And we have once again this big circle with angels all around it, and then in the center we have Christ in the wine press, and Christ is treading out the grapes. You remember the grapes of wrath, which can symbolize divine judgment. However, in this context, Christ actually sometimes is pressed into the wine press. He becomes, his blood is the grapes, is the wine of the Eucharist. So it takes on a Eucharistic and sacrificial meaning. And the blood of Christ. Christ is, the wine press becomes a symbol for the cross of Christ, or for the church. The grapes are Christ's blood shed on the cross or on the altar of the Mass. And Christ in the winepress symbolizes his sacrificial death, shedding his blood for mankind. Now, this image of the 19th century reproduction doesn't seem to have any inscription on it. So evidently, when it was copied, not all the inscriptions were copied. But there is some text that goes with each of these in the publication, and it says that there were some notes that were left about this, and on the beam of the winepress were the words in Latin, but here we translate them. Christ trod the winepress alone, so that all could be saved. I tread the winepress alone. The winepress is the Holy Cross, which just really spells out all that complex iconography. I haven't done the research to verify this, but the 19th century publication also said that this is the oldest known representation of the mystic winepress. There's an earlier 12th century capital in the church at Vézelay that shows the mystic mill in which it's basically a flour is being ground, and they believe that has symbolic meaning of related to this in the sense of bread being ground. Here it's the wine. Well, if things don't work out too well, you don't take advantage of all of that atonement, it seems that you could end up in hell. And there are a whole series of Last Judgment illustrations. The last one is this hell scene. And she shows hell as layers, layers and layers of fiery underworld with the flames all over the place, and the demons torment the sinners, and people try to pick out what their sin may have been by how they're being tormented. Down the lower right, you see chained is Satan, and he's got sinners that he's punishing on his lap. And it looks like it's coming out of his lap or his side. There are heads that are devouring sinners. This becomes a very familiar image. I'm thinking about a painting from, I think it's the 14th century in Pisa, that has a very similar, but more elaborate, a similar Satan. Satan in the 13th century mosaics of the ceiling of the baptistry of Florence. So this idea of Satan chewing on people and sort of being enthroned in hell is a very familiar one in medieval art. Other people get thrown into the fiery pit, as you can see. There's also a number of images from the Apocalypse. And in this case, the horror of Babylon and the great beast, who of course are the evil foes of God, are falling into the fiery pit. And people who have followed them seem to be mourning, but the angels are making sure they stay down in there. One of the most familiar images from the apocalyptic vision of St. John is the apocalyptic woman, or the woman clothed in the sun. For probably millennia, has long been identified as the Virgin Mary. And the way I'm going to paraphrase, obviously, rather than cite exactly, but the paraphrase is that there was a woman clothed in the sun with the crescent moon at her feet and the stars in her crown. And she gives birth to a child who is taken up to heaven. Of course, the child is the Christ child. She is threatened by the seven-headed dragon, whose tail sweeps the stars from the sky. And the dragon pours out water from its mouth to drown the woman. But the woman is given the wings of an eagle so she can fly away and escape. And you see all of those elements there. The dragon sweeping the stars from the sky with his kind of fan-like tail. He has tiny little heads coming out of his crown, and little wavy lines that represent the water are very ineffectively trying to flood the woman. But she is this she is this iconic, huge figure of Mary. On the other side, you have the beast coming from the sea, and those who are going to follow the beast. And of course, they eventually, as we saw a minute ago, they do get thrown into the fiery pit. The very last page, this is the one your text illustrated, the very last page of Herrad's book shows the congregation of the nuns at Hohenburg. It shows the congregation of the nuns at Hohenburg. And you can see they've just got rows and rows of nuns with little busts, and each one of the heads, except for two of them, the first one and the last one, I don't know quite why, but each one of them is labeled with the name of a nun, or even some are lay sisters. And they're all facing the same way. They've all got veils. Of course, at this time, nobody does portraits in the sense of likeness. That kind of naturalism just doesn't exist. But I thought it was kind of interesting because there are differences of height and slight variation of the features. And of course, I have no way of knowing, was the shorter nun the one that is made shorter here or not. But I thought that there was some variation. They're all sisters, but they still have a little individuality. And then, as you can see, you have standing Herrad, who is the abbess, and a long inscription next to her, which I will read for the translation. O you white flowers, pure as snow, who spread the perfume of your virtues, and who, scorning earthly dust, rest in the contemplation of divine things. May your course be ever directed toward heaven, where you'll be face to face with the betrothed, at a moment still hidden from your view. And the betrothed, of course, is Christ. Nuns are believed to, nuns are the brides of Christ. And so she's saying that eventually you will see Christ, the betrothed, the bridegroom, at some time that you don't know in the future.